going to we're going to go over how it all got started, but the final Roman emperor, the Islamic Antichrist, and the Vatican's last crusade. It's fascinating, ladies and gentlemen, that Tom Horn and Chris Putnam were quoted around the world. They were sought out from every major news source in the world. They were accused of having an insider in the Vatican, and what Tom is going to tell you tonight is going to make even the hair on the back of your head stand up, because again, what we're doing is we're seeing prophecy, real prophecy unfold. No one could have argued with Tom Horn, and even to the date that the former Pope stepped down before, when I call it this guy came on the scene, their last entry into the 4-year investigation authors will unveil, and I want to read this because this is cool, because Tom's greatest prediction yet that is going to shake the foundation of the world is incorporated in it. He's going to talk about the weapons of mass destruction that ISIS will use and how it will lead to an apocalypse. Petrus Romanus, Albert Pike, the Islamic State, and the coming Armageddon. Now, here's what's interesting. Does Pope Francis become the destroyer? He certainly has a good shot at it right now. Or will there be another? And what's interesting is the last crusade's agenda is hidden in plain sight. And ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the prophecy of the Qumran Sibyl or the Muslim Mahdi. I'm sorry, they're not the same, on the Muslim Mahdi. So, Tom, let's run over a little background, because we've got 3 hours, and how this all got started, because this has been a 4-year undertaking on your part. And let's talk about Petrus Romanus first.
Okay, Steve. Hey, great to be with you and the Hagmans again on radio. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to come on to talk about all of this. And for the people out there listening who are probably right now wondering, well, what happened to Chris Putnam? Because we advertised this in our social media and stuff today. Just before we came on the air, Chris slammed his finger in a door and pulled one of his fingernails plumb out. So he said he's in too much pain, can't do the show. So we hope that he gets well quickly. And I'll just have to do the best I can. The other caveat that I would throw out there is that there are portions of the research that were done in this latest entry, the Final Roman Emperor book, that was done by Steve, in particular having a lot to do with the ancient aspects of this prophecy that I won't be able to speak to, but it's okay. People will be able to get the book in a week from now, and they'll be able to read everything that Chris did, and they'll hear Chris in other programs, I'm sure. So, yeah, funny thing, Steve and Joe and Doug, is that we never did set out to write 4 books. I mean, this thing just took on its own kind of organic feeling, and issues kept coming to us, opportunities kept coming to us, the phone kept ringing, people knocking on the door. It was just amazing how really this whole thing has had an almost supernatural or preternatural kind of feel to it, beginning all the way back in 2011. I was speaking at, our mutual friend Chuck Misler at his Strategic Perspectives Conference. I was one of the keynote speakers in 2011 at Strategic Perspectives, and I was standing in the back room, and Steve, you know Joe Artis. He was back there with me, and I'm waiting my turn to speak, right? But I happened to say to him, I said, something that really amazes me is that nobody has written a thorough investigative analysis of the prophecy of the Pope, and yet Pope Benedict XVI, who was the Pope in 2011, is the next to the last on the list. And I said, you would think that even if there are, people like us evangelicals that don't put any stock in much or any of Catholic prophecy, you would think, if for no other reason, the historical importance of a 900-year-old Catholic and a famous Catholic prophecy at that, called the prophecy of the Pope, that given that whenever Benedict is gone, the next guy is going to be the last one on the list. I'm just amazed that nobody's written a thorough investigation about this. So we're having that conversation, and the more we talked about it, the more Joe Artis said to me, he said, well, then you're a publishing house, right? So maybe you should be the one that writes it. So we're standing back there making notes, and this is where this whole preternatural thing began. I said, okay, I'm going to run up to my room before I have to speak, and I'm going to email myself these notes. And when I get back to my office, I'm going to really consider writing a book on the final pope, who's called Petrus Romanus in the list of popes. And I went up to my room, literally opened my email, and I had an email from a guy by the name of Chris Putnam. Chris and I had only ever exchanged a couple of emails. We had never spoke to each other. I knew that he ran a blog site, Logos Apologia, but we had never done anything together. And I opened his email. In fact, we hadn't even emailed for probably a year or 2 years at that time. I opened his email and he said, "Hey, Tom, I want to talk to you about the final pope, Petrus Romanus, and kind of pick your brain on it." I couldn't believe it, right? The timing of that. So I emailed him back and I said, "Hey, Chris, you can't believe the timing of your email, brother." And one thing led to the other. I'm not going to give this to you blow by blow, but that's how it started. It had this whole kind of supernatural timing around it. We decided that we were going to write a thorough examination of the book, which wound up being called Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope Is Here. If people are not familiar with what that is about, it's a 900-year-old prophecy. It's ascribed to a Irish bishop by the name of Malachi Morgare, who in the 1100s wrote down a list. He had a vision, and he wrote down a list of 112 popes. Each of these popes would arrive in succession. He gave mottos. He gave ways to identify who the pope would be, and the final one would be Petrus Romanus. Well, Pope number 111, next to the last, was Pope Benedict XVI. Gloria Olivae, the glory of the olives. He was an Olivetan priest. So in 2011, we write this book. But in the book, in addition to everything else that we did, we speculated that Pope Benedict was going to retire, that he was not going to die in office like popes for almost 600 years have done. It's been kind of, the unspoken protocol. Popes don't resign. They just serve in office until they're dead. And we said this pope is not going to do that. Specifically in the book, Petrus Romanus, a year in advance of his resignation, we said we have reasons to believe that he is going to retire and make way for the final pope. Furthermore, we said we strongly believe, that he is going to do this in April of 2012. Well, we were out there on television. Steve, you and I did radio on this, remember?
Absolutely.
And saying that this is what we believe is going to happen. We believe that it's important. There was a Jesuit, a Belgian priest by the name of René Thibault, and 64 years ago now, he too said that the Gloria Olivae is going to resign office in 2012, making the way for the final pope. So there was a lot of stuff, investigation. Some of this was metaphysical, some of it was gut feeling, some of it was revelation. But here's what happened. 2012 comes and goes, and Pope Benedict doesn't step down publicly. And it's really weird because I was sending emails at that time to Chris Putnam, and I was saying, "Hey, man, it's not over till it's over." And then I would literally say to myself, what in the world are you talking about? It's not over till it's over. He's still the Pope. He hasn't stepped down. You missed it. You got the date wrong. But then now the world knows that February 28th, 2013, the Vatican announces that Pope Benedict has resigned. And that very same day, they gave an interview with the New York Times. The El Observatorio Romano, the official newspaper of the Vatican, gave an interview with the New York Times in which they admitted that Pope Benedict had actually officially and secretly resigned when he had returned from a trip in March of 2012 and made his resignation official to the Curia, just to a few insider cardinals. Because remember, at that time, how they were having the WikiLeaks and all that, and blabbermouth cardinals out there spilling the beans about everything, so they were really tight-lipped about it. And they started remodeling a building that the nuns had been using for housing that was going to then become housing for the emeritus pope. And so we not only got it right, we got it right to the month and to the year. Well, my phone lit up, Putnam's phone lit up, everybody in the world wanted to talk to us, and as you said a moment ago, Steve, they figured we had an insider at the Vatican, and I laughingly said after the fact that if we would have told them our insider at the Vatican was the Holy Spirit, that really would have freaked them out, right?
Yeah, that would have melted down the pontiff.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, so everybody everywhere wants to talk to us. I was turning down everything, CNN, History Channel. I told everybody no. Chris went on the History Channel, was part of their Nostradamus thing, and talked about it. But, by the way, while we got Doug and Joe Hagman here, Steve, you'll verify that this is true. I've got to the point now where I've told Steve Quayle, I'm not interested in doing radio with anybody anymore. I want to quit doing radio. But I said I will always do radio with Steve Quayle on Hagman and Hagman. Is that true, Steve?
That is true, and the sentiment is mine also, outside of the fact. And I say that, listen, this isn't a mutual love fest, but here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. When God sends two men down, and the engine is the Holy Spirit, and we're on track, we're literally on track, and Tom and I are co-investigating the same subject matter. Obviously, the title of our new DVD series is The Unholy See. When you are through with tonight, you're going to see something that is so astringent and what I say, wonderfully laid out of God knowing the end from the beginning. And so, Tom, I thank you for that, but that's my sentiment, too. After 25 years on talk radio and being told this and told that and accused this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I shared this with Tom. I think it was 23 or 24 years ago. I'll have to check with Hawk. He remembers just about every one of my shows. I said, you're going to watch Islam and Catholicism merge. You're also going to watch the greatest war in the Catholic Church. I'm not talking about a war of words. I'm talking a shooting war. You're going to watch that take place. Well, Tom, you know how that went over. You know, I'm crazy. I'm insane. But then and the deal is that there's no way I could have known that any more than you were directed and Chris was used by the Lord. You guys are doing the same thing at the same time. God gave you that. So we're now at a position, because you know this, everybody basically has been the standard, the 10 hills of Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, and Ben, that's not what you're saying or seeing, or that's not what I'm saying or seeing either. So go ahead and proceed. But I just want you to know that I find it interesting, and I said this to my wife. I said 23 years ago, I was talking about it. Fast forward, and tonight, Tom and I are talking about the fulfillment of that. Now, is that cool or what?
Yeah, and hundreds of years ago, the Cumae Sibyl was talking about it, and this Pope and the Vatican today are behaving in a way that they believe it, and they're working to make it happen, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Now, one thing you failed to say, and let me say it, Steve, is that our investigation. People think that because you and I are good friends and we go back for a long time in radio that we talk all the time and we always check with each other about what our and we never do that. We never talk about what our investigations are, what we're working on, and yet time after time, like your new documentary film, is absolutely a parallel to the work that Chris and I have been doing in secrecy for the last year on the final Roman emperor. And I want to really pitch your documentary film. From the people that have seen it, they say that it's one of the best. It is the best thing that you've ever produced. One of the best things ever produced on the subject matter, and is extraordinarily well done. So I was humbled to get to be a small part of that, in which we were actually talking about the second year of me and Putnam's investigation, which actually even then happened as a result of me being on radio with you. So, and recall, Steve, how after we accurately stated what we said we believe is going to happen with Pope Benedict, he's going to retire, he's going to happen in April. We did that a year in advance. We're both on television, and our book was in print before it happened, and it's also in the book Petrus Hermanus. So there was no way to deny it. Everybody had to say, wow, you guys are fabulous guessers, right? But so now we're out there doing radio with you. The whole world wants to ask us about that. But if you recall, in 2011 and early 2012, there was another thing that was going on with the Vatican, and that is it had its top astronomers out there talking about astrobiology. And specifically, they were saying some very loaded things. They were saying it's more likely than not that advanced extraterrestrial intelligence exists elsewhere in the universe. Furthermore, Gabriel Jose Funes, who was the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group at that time and a top Catholic for the Vatican, he was out there saying, I would baptize the aliens into the Catholic faith if they were to visit the Earth. Guy Consolmagno, who at that time was the Pope's personal astronomer and has since taken Jose Funes' place as the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group, he too was saying we would baptize aliens into the Catholic faith. But then suddenly something started changing, and this was why people started calling the shows we were doing, Steve. They started saying not only would it not be against Catholic faith to believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, but they said actually the heresy would be not to believe in advanced extraterrestrial intelligence because that would put limits on God's creative ability. And then from there, they ratcheted it up to an even more mysterious place where they started saying, and furthermore, there is a point in the near future, by the way, Tanzella Niti, who is an Opus Dei level bishop or priest in the Vatican who writes a lot of their doctrine and works at the Pope's university in Rome, said that soon we could be faced with information from an extraterrestrial source that might require us to have to reread and alter everything we've ever thought we knew about the gospel. Well, why in the world would he make such an extraordinary statement? Because they believe that extraterrestrial intelligence exists. Now, why do they believe that? Well, that's another mystery, maybe or maybe not. We'll get into that tonight. We went deeply into that in book number 2 in this 4-year investigation called Exo Vaticana. But they say that these aliens are more likely to be morally superior to us. And what they mean by that is that what we know about ourselves is that we are fallen, the fall of Adam, right, and Eve. We are fallen, but these aliens, maybe they didn't fall. And if they didn't fall, then they're closer to God than we are. They have a better understanding of the union of God and of the triune Godhead and whatever than what we do. And therefore, they said, it may not be us baptizing them into our faith when they come here, but rather it's going to be them baptizing us into their faith, into a perfected understanding of the gospel. So stuff started getting really weird around the time that Benedict stepped down. And so when we were doing shows with you, Steve, and others, people were calling in and they were emailing us and they were saying, man, what do you guys make of what the Vatican is out there saying right now about aliens and they're morally superior and they're more likely than not to exist and blah, blah, blah. They're our space brothers. And Steve and I knew I mean, Chris and I knew that if we were really going to get to the bottom line and get an authoritative answer and not just come across as a couple of evangelicals taking cheap shots at the Vatican, the way we were going to have to do that is we were going to have to go to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona, where the Vatican has an advanced technology telescope, and they're also part of the Mount Graham Observatory group. There's 3 telescopes up there. I'm not going to go into all that, but bottom line was I negotiated this through the Arizona State University. If somebody wants a blow-by-blow and all the information, they can get the massive, it was our best-selling book of all time, get the massive book, Exo Vaticana. It is extraordinarily well-researched, hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. We knew we had to cross every T and dot every I, right, on everything that we were saying. Chuck Missler said it's the best book ever written on the subject of astrobiology from a conservative Christian worldview. But we went to the top of Mount Graham. I got this set up. We went up there. We met with the Jesuit who was on duty that day. They allowed us to walk all over the Vatican's telescope to see everything there. We went to the radio telescope. We ultimately wound up on the top of that mountain at the large binocular telescope. That's the largest binocular telescope in the world, where the Lucifer device is at. We were shown the Lucifer device. In fact, if people watch the trailer for the new book that's on the front of skywatchtv.com, skywatchtv.com, watch the, then scroll down the page and find the series we're running over there right now on the final Roman Emperor. You'll see the trailer, and you'll see me and Chris inside the gigantic observatory, the large binocular telescope building, up on the 7th floor. And the man who spent 4 to 5 hours that day with us, one of their lead technology guys, pointing at the middle of the binocular telescope, the twin mirrors, and saying, "This is the Lucifer device." And that's a piece of infrared technology that we believe is allowing them to monitor something that is approaching the Earth based on some things that Malachi Martin had said in 2009, and which we verified with the Jesuit who was on duty there that day. Anyway, bottom line, that was the second book, but it wasn't until we came down off of Mount Graham that we really were made to understand what was happening with that mountain, and the fact that the Apache, who had resisted the Vatican, actually joined environmentalists in Arizona to fight the Vatican and Arizona State University and NASA to try to keep them from building an observatory on the top of that mountain. It wasn't until we came off the mountain that we learned why the Apache wanted to fight them, and it was because they consider Mount Graham to be what you and I, Steve, would call a stargate, a doorway, a portal.
Well, I think that too. Let's just give everyone the name now, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Lucifer device. It could have been named anything, but they named it Lucifer. Large binocular telescope, near infrared utility with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research, ER. And what's fascinating to me, Tom, that when you guys found this out is we were able to corroborate a secret meeting there on Mount Graham where the Pope, never announced, went to that area to have a meeting, okay? That was interesting. Tim and, good night, the film team are in Rome, and that little tidbit is thrown out there. And obviously you had confirmation when you were sitting at the restaurant, did you not? So here's the thing. If it's a Stargate, now here's something that I want people to understand that's really, really critical at this point, that we just had the Pope return from Antarctica. We had the entity in the White House, and we had Kirill, the Russian Orthodox Church head, all in Antarctica, Patagonia. And what's fascinating, Tom, is in the special operations community, I was informed by somebody who's really well connected, that they're literally watching anomalous openings and gates powering up, okay? That's what Greg Evenson said on this show. And his source was multi-star or a single star. He, when you're dealing with generals, his sources, I would tell you this, are impeccable. As a matter of fact, after we broke that news, with Greg Evenson broke it on Hagman and Hagman, the two of the mouthpieces that are telling Greg what's going on really wanted people to understand that this is no BS. They actually used a different word, and that the quote-unquote, the gates are opening. So when you first told people on this radio show that Hagman and Hagman about Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, and it came on the television series, I think it's on Netflix, you blew my mind away. I had never read that, but what the aliens portrayed, the way they were portrayed, fits the description of the Vatican astronomers and also a multi-star general who drew it out. Very talented. I mean, amazing artist. What's the chance of those three things happening? So the Pope has a secret meeting. You're dealing with the stargates. The Native Americans know it's a stargate. They name their telescope a binocular telescope, and isn't it fascinating? It's a bino telescope. I am absolutely blown away by what corollary confirmation, there you go, by the Spirit of the living God is doing. Now, people, this is real stuff. This isn't Tom and Steve just having passed some mushrooms. By the way, I'm in Montana right now, and Tom is in Missouri. So, you've got to understand this. This is such this is such a God in his love for his creation opening up all this stuff. And Tom, I was blown away at what your unfettered access there. Do you want to go into what that guy told you in the restaurant?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a restaurant. Yeah. What had happened was we met. With a guide. You cannot go up to the top of Mount Graham, by the way, if somebody's listening to this show and if they're thinking, well, I'm just going to go check it out for myself. You won't get anything but arrested and thrown in jail. You cannot go to the top of Mount Graham unless you work this out through Arizona State University like we did. And you have to be taken up there by a guide that works for the observatory. That's the only way you get up there. You go up, 2/3 of the way up the mountain, you run into these giant fences. They're really high. You can't climb over them. They got barbed or razor wire around the top of them. 2 or 3 signs in all kinds of languages, Spanish, Chinese, whatever, American, talking about all the horrible things they're going to do to you if you come over the top of that case. You can't get up there unless you're invited. Well, what happens is the road is really windy, a lot of switchbacks, and I had taken some stuff to help me with that at the base of the hill. Joe Artist didn't, and Chris Putnam didn't, and halfway up the hill they were sure wishing they would have. But about 2/3 of the way up the mountain, there's a campground that was built during Roosevelt's New Deal when they were creating jobs, basically, for people that were survivors of the Great Depression. And so he said, we're going to stop here, we're going to have a lunch, and then from here we'll go on up the mountain. So we go inside there, and there's a guy, he's the caretaker of the lodge, if you will, and he's got a fire going, and he's sitting there mixing some wood up in the fire, and it's all crackling. So we get our sandwiches, and I go over and I sit down by him, and he starts asking me what we're doing. And I was not trying to give him very much information. Well, we're going up to Mount Graham, we're going up to the top of the mountain, to the observatory up there, and blah, blah, blah. And Chris is sitting there next to me and Joe. And all of a sudden, the guy that's stirring the fire, you can tell he's been around a long time, one of those old dudes that has seen a lot, right? And he looks at me and he says, why are you going up there? And so we give him a little bit of information. We're not trying to tell him what we're doing. And he said, He said, it wouldn't have nothing to do with the Pope's visit, would it? And we're looking at him like, what in the world are you talking about, right? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the Pope. He said he come down there in a helicopter the other day and had this visit. And so he's just telling us. So what was funny is we didn't even include that information in the book, and we didn't talk about it publicly, and therefore that was another one of those things where when Timothy Alberino is at the Vatican, and he got, I don't know how much I can say about this, he got behind the door.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want about it because it's in the new, documentary, and we're not giving
some of it
the
is
crown jewels away.
Yeah, I mean, what he was able, he got connected to the right people, and what Timothy was able to do, I mean, he got into the Jesuit headquarters. Now that there again, this is not just you don't just drive to Rome and say I want to visit with the Jesuit leadership, but he got inside, and so what was ironic was in there he learned about the Pope's visit to Mount Graham. Well, Timothy didn't know what this guy on the mountain had told us, and Joe and Chris do and can verify the story that I'm telling you. So there again, that was like out of the mouth of two witnesses, right? There was a verification. What in the world is the Pope doing flying to the top of Mount Graham, right, to visit with them there about whatever's going on? Well, then Timothy's, authorities that are able to get him past the guards into the Jesuit headquarters at the Vatican, he asked them, he says, really? And he's listening to some of the stuff they're saying, and he says, have you ever read the book by Chris Putnam and Tom Horn, Exo Vaticana? Well, they said they had never even heard of it, but they're telling him everything that we had confirmed and the fact that they are monitoring something from the top of Mount Graham that is approaching the Earth using the Lucifer device, everything the Jesuit on duty there that day had told us. But then maybe I shouldn't say anything about the Stargate. What the guy takes. Yeah, I won't say anything about it. People need to get the new documentary. I'm not even sure if it's in the documentary where they went from there, because some of that stuff is really highly guarded, and Timothy was telling me that, there's parts of that he can't talk about. But bottom line is, Steve, it all verifies exactly what you're saying. This Stargate technology is something very real. When we went to Mount Graham, one of the questions that I asked the Jesuit who was on duty that day, and Guy Consolmagno, who we had hoped to meet there that day, was not there, so I contacted him from Rome, and the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group, who is on tour right now going around the world with his new book, and his seminar is titled, Would You Baptize an Alien? So they keep talking about this stuff. He gave me 5 interviews via the internet from Rome. So we were able to get to really the authoritative voices on all this. But it all goes back to our old friend Malachi Martin. When Malachi was asked in 2009 by Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell, and he said, Father, why did the Vatican force themselves onto the top of a mountain in southeastern Arizona to build an observatory, and what are they doing up there? And people can go and YouTube this and listen to Malachi's answer. He said it's because they know at the highest levels of Vatican governance and jurisprudence what is approaching the earth, and that it will be of the utmost importance in coming years. And Malachi, that ignited a firestorm, but he suggested that it would be within a decade or so when he thought whatever this was that is approaching the earth would become very, very important. And about 10 years to the date, after that, what happened? 2009, the Vatican, so this is 2 years before we write the book Petrus Romanus. The Vatican convenes a study week on astrobiology at the Pope's summer residence in Gandolfo, Italy. So they invite all these people to come to Italy, to Rome, and it's something like, I forget how many, by the way, 40 or 50, whatever it is, top astronomers, geologists, theologians. But what are they doing? They come together to study one thing, and that is, what will the impact on the Earth's religions be given the disclosure or the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence? Almost 10 years to the day, right when Malachi said this is going to start becoming important. 90 days after that, the Royal Society, so now we're talking about the oldest scientific body in the world, they come together to celebrate their 350-year anniversary. And of all things that they could pick, what do they pick? People can Google this and read it. They pick a subject matter called alien detection and the implications for society. And people from around the world, again, experts from around the world, including representatives, astronomers from the Vatican, go and they have these closed-door meetings in which Lord Martin Rees, who was the Queen's astronomer at that time and the head of the Royal Society, he said, aliens are staring us right in the face in ways that the world is not even aware of. And they talked about extraordinary evidence of this and that. And so, by the way, at the time, because we couldn't get behind those closed doors, I assembled my own gathering of 20 of the world's leading experts to talk about what do you think it is they're talking about behind closed doors. And when we release our book next week, that's only one. All 20 hours of those interviews is only one of the literally hundreds of things that we're giving away with this final book, because this is the final one, the final case, the last thing we have to say on the subject matter. But and we're doing this, I would want the public to also know this. If you're watching this current special investigative report at Skywatch TV, if you're watching it on TV or on the Roku channels or on YouTube, the reason the first 2 weeks of that 5-week report was with Steve Quayle is because his brand new documentary has everything in the world to do with how this all began at Mount Graham, but the much bigger revelations that Timothy Alberino uncovered in Rome, and I'm just going to say this cryptically, the Stargate that he was shown there. I hope I'm not saying I'm not, something I'm not supposed to say here.
No, listen, you've got freedom to say whatever you want, because, again, it's so critical, because in the next hour, Tom, ladies and gentlemen, I tell Tom, I said, one of these days when God just gives us supernatural strength and ability, this will be a 3-hour introduction to the end times in a manner and a way that you've probably never considered it. I'll tell you this, that we're talking about, Tom, a moral superior. They're talking about the Vatican's statements, a moral superior alien, if you will, right, civilization. Well, trust me, if they're morally superior, they're not showing up on Earth to molest women, take their eggs, and in all the various sexual positions, pun intended, the aliens get themselves into. I would question the moral superiority. It sounds to me like a return, and I know, and we all know what's really going on here. What they're doing is presenting another gospel. They're presenting their alien, if you will, their plot, their plan, their scheme, in order to seduce mankind away from God's word, from his redemption, and from Jesus. So what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, remember this, we're talking about the largest group of believers, and is it not astonishing to you, Tom? Let me throw this in as an aside, because I don't get something. Maybe you can explain to me how are, and if any traditional Catholics want to email me, that's fine. By the way, I'm not beating up on Catholics. All I'm saying is this, that which they have believed for centuries is now being thrown out the door, and there's kind of a, if you will, there's those that still want to defend, quote, the Pope at all costs, but here's a guy that is absolutely bringing in the very thing your book is talking about. And when you wrote the title to your book, I'm talking about the 4th book, and I guess, is it safe to say this will be the final book of this series?
It is the final book of this series.
Okay, but how strange today. You saw this story, the Pope and an imam have a special meeting, okay? And the deal is the Pope has done everything to be the ultimate ecumenicist and also to basically challenge the divinity of Jesus, the position of Jesus Christ, and basically I have yet to hear him make one biblical statement that he doesn't twist against the original intention of the Scripture. Saying that, my question to you, Tom, how many of